Teflon is known as a forever chemical, one that releases toxic chemicals when broken down at high heat. This might seem like a wild choice to use for coating pots and pans, but in reality, most non-stick cookware in the US is coated in this harmful chemical. Luckily, a trend toward non-toxic cookware is on the rise.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Jordan Nathan, the founder and CEO of Caraway, a non-toxic home good brand you've probably seen someone rave about on Instagram. I'm Becca Skutak, and here to learn all the ways our pans are currently killing us is my lovely co-host,
Dominic Midori Davis. And as usual, before we get into our conversation with Jordan, we have our two truths and a lie, so listen carefully to see which one of these statements just isn't true. Is it that Jordan started out as an aspiring cook, that he's actually gotten Teflon poisoning before, or that the company was almost dead upon arrival after a product mishap?
Ooh, sounds like there's a good episode in store for you. But before you listen, or after, we would ask you if you wouldn't mind just rating and reviewing the show. You can do so wherever you are already listening to this podcast, so it should be super quick and easy, and we would really appreciate it. But now, here's our conversation with Jordan. Hey Jordan, how's it going?
Doing great today. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for coming on the podcast. Before we really dive in, very important question to start with. What was the last thing you cooked?
Ooh, great question. I did make eggs last night, so nothing too complicated. Nice, healthy dinner.
Love that. And listeners, if you're unfamiliar, we're asking because we're chatting with the founder of Caraway. So Jordan, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the company?
Yeah, so Caraway was founded in late 2019. We are a non-toxic kitchenware brand that started off with cookware. Today, we've expanded across the kitchen. Our whole mission is to bring non-toxic goods to your home that are high design, easy to use, and help customers get rid of nasty chemicals like Teflon, microplastics, and a lot of traditionally toxic materials that are found in your kitchenware.
Very interesting. And I'm curious because, of course, I cook all the time and a lot of people do cook and interact with these products, but it's never really occurred to me to think about what's in the pans or sort of pay that much attention to the brand or anything like that. What got you interested in building in this space to begin with?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, prior to Caraway, I actually had a kind of scary product experience where I left a Teflon pan on my burner one night accidentally for about 45 minutes. I turned on the flame. I think my dad had called me. I forgot I left the flame on the pan, and my apartment ended up filling of fumes. And I actually got Teflon poisoning from it and started doing more research, called the poison control hotline, and really started to get really interested in the category and couldn't wrap my head around why something we're cooking off of could be potentially so toxic, and felt inspired to bring an alternative to the market.
Yeah, first of all, not surprising that anything in the US is poisonous, but a big pan industry. But how many chemicals are in our pans? Because you brought up a good point. I mean, what happens when you just leave a pan running? Does any pan just put toxins in the air when you use it automatically, or do you have to keep it running for a while?
Yeah, it really depends on the material. So materials like cast iron or stainless steel traditionally are safe to use. It's really your nonstick coatings that are made with Teflon that after only 2.5 minutes on your burner start leaching into your food. And so it doesn't take very long to start leaching. There's over 10,000 types of PFAS, which is the category that nonstick is made with. And whether you scratch your pans or you overheat them, those chemicals are making their way into your food each time that you cook.
Wait, that's really crazy. Why is that allowed to be sold? Do a lot of people know about this?
I think it's becoming more and more known. There's a lot of legislation today that's looking to ban PFAS. They're known also as forever chemicals. You may have seen that in the news headlines. And it's really an indestructible material that's in a ton of different products. It's known for its non-stick properties. And once it's made, it's really hard to break down. It's in a lot of our waterways and drinking water. And because it is such a durable material, it's been built into a lot of products over the last number of decades. And, I think nonstick cookware for many, many decades has leveraged this material for the nonstick properties. And, I think has not seen an alternative come out until kind of recent years with ceramic, which is what Caraway sells.
And so I'm curious, with it being, as you mentioned, something that's becoming kind of more known and more common, what was it like actually building this company, sort of taking that idea, okay, I want to make these types of cookware, obviously without this chemical involved. How did you go from the idea to actually building the product? Like, was that a difficult process? Or did you find it's one of those like, this was right here, why were we not doing this before?
Really a mix of both. So ceramic, the material that we use, has been around for almost a decade. And I think one of the things I had noticed when starting to build the company was, first off, which material makes sense to bring into the market. We did look at cast iron, we did look at stainless steel. They're great materials, but I think for an average consumer, they're a little bit more daunting to use, and felt like, at least from my own personal experience, there was a need for products that were easy to use in the market. And when looking at ceramic, it had existed in the market, mostly on retail shelves. The brands that talked about it and used it focused on the eco-friendly properties, and really saw this white space around how do we create a brand that can actually educate consumers on the non-toxic properties of ceramic. And so it was really a repositioning of the material, making sure we had the right testing reports to back up the claims. And I think where product development got challenging was, while yes, we are very focused on the materials, making sure we had the right form factors that were beautiful to display on your countertop, thinking through storage and organization. If you've seen our products before, all of our sets come with storage and organization pieces. And so we wanted to create a really holistic solution that was not just non-toxic, but also something that was easy to use, great to look at, easy to store, and having 4 kind of major pillars of the product and brand, and solving that in one solution, was a challenging process to go through.
Was it expensive to source an alternative?
Wasn't necessarily expensive to source, but it took a lot of time. There's a number of coating partners out there that exist throughout the world. For us, we spent quite a bit of time on formulating our own coating that we felt like was the safest, was the best out there. A lot of times nonsticks will be really great out of the box, and then after a month or two, the nonstick no longer works. And so longevity was something we were really focused on. With any ceramic or nonstick, they don't last forever. But in an effort to, create a sustainable business with A, really high quality products, but B, products that can reduce waste, it took almost 18 months total to dial in our coating and make sure we had not just the safest coating on the market, but also one of the best from a non-stick perspective, but also durability.
And I know that this isn't the first kitchenware company that you've worked on. So maybe if you want to talk about your background prior to launching Caraway, and I'm definitely curious why it made sense to launch Caraway as a separate company, as opposed to, say, maybe building out a line at the company you were already at.
Yeah, that's right. So this wasn't my first start in the kitchen. Prior to Caraway, I worked at a company called Mohawk Group. They owned about 5 Amazon brands at the time when I worked there. I ran their kitchen division. The brand was named Vremi, Vremi. We sold a lot of kitchen products on Amazon. Really low price point, around $10 to $15. We sold everything from cookware, knives and utensils, bakeware, small appliances. And interestingly, one of the theses of that brand that I had built was back in 2015 on Amazon, most of the products you had in the marketplace were black or stainless steel. And the one thing that we really did with that brand that was successful was bringing color into the category. And I think one of the learnings was color drives retention, and people want to match their whole kitchens. And so definitely a learning I took into Caraway. But in my time at my prior business, spent a lot of time in factories, saw a lot of bad manufacturing processes, got really familiar with these materials, and took a lot of those learnings, around materials and safety into Caraway that we built today.
And why wouldn't it have made sense to launch this within your existing brand prior?
Yeah, so I worked for a different corporation. I was an employee there and got to a point where I wanted to kind of give a shot at starting my own company and branching out. And, I think interestingly, that business I worked on was very Amazon focused. And I think with that, we were selling lower priced products. And, throughout my tenure there, met a lot of great factories who were at the higher end. And, the whole D2C boom was going on. And I was kind of watching that and missing out, and felt it'd be really interesting to launch a brand with higher quality products, higher design, and start with a D2C focus, because I already knew the Amazon side of the business.
Yeah, and thinking about the D2C focus for a second, because I know obviously both consumer interest in the D2C sector as well as investor interest in the D2C sector has kind of gone on a roller coaster over the last 10, 15 years. It was really in and then it was really out and then it was kind of back in, kind of back out. And so I'm definitely curious what it's been like for you launching this through that system, how you've been able to kind of ride the different waves thus far. You mentioned you were missing out. You definitely started a little bit after the biggest wave of D2C with the Warby Parkers and the Dollar Shave Club, et cetera.
Exactly. I mean, we were able to launch and fundraise, I'd say, in a different market than what there is today for direct to consumer, but definitely in a, second or third wave after a lot of the initial brands had launched. I think for us, what was really challenging was at the time we launched, there were 6 or 7 other kitchen brands that launched as well. And we were actually both last to market, but also last to fundraise. And so when we went to go fundraise, every investor we spoke with had already picked their kitchen brand to tackle and invest in. And so, I think on the flip side, the benefit was we got to watch a lot of other brands launch and really figure out our place within the market. And so, I think we caught the tail end of major D2C investing, and launching in November 2019 and holidays was great. That's when kitchenware, has its highest peak of the season. But 3 months later, COVID happened. And as you know, most people were home, they were cooking, and we really had the benefit of really that change in lifestyle that gave such a big boost to the home and kitchen.
Yeah. No, and that's so interesting to hear you say that you think potentially launching toward the later end, if not last in the category, was like a benefit for you guys. I definitely wouldn't mind if you talk more about why and sort of like what little tweaks and changes did you make watching other brands go before you guys?
I think initially, I even go back to my initial fundraising deck. The goal initially was I was just going to source a product off the shelf from a factory. And if you actually look at the initial pricing of the product, I think it was around $285 for our cookware set. We were thinking of positioning the brand focused on kind of your post-college millennial who might be buying from IKEA or something and didn't want to wait to the registry phase. And I think watching a lot of the other players come out, a number were focused on stainless steel, a handful on cast iron, and then a lot in the ceramic world or nonstick. We're kind of targeting that millennial post-college consumer and or doing a mix of materials. And so as we kind of saw the market change, we saw this really clear gap and learnings from talking with consumers around wanting to invest in kitchenware at the registry stage and beyond. And so with that, I think it gave us confidence to put a little bit more time and effort into the product design, not just do it off the shelf. And seeing others who entered with more of a design perspective, it helped us change our color palette. It helped us change our price point, what pieces that we put in the set. And while a lot of those other brands did a lot of things right, we were able to craft our space within the kitchen D2C world that others weren't playing in. I think one thing that was consistent throughout was we always wanted to be known for ease of use, non-toxic materials, and design. And so as we approached the brand's development, some of that shifted in terms of how we approached it, but we kept those principles really consistent throughout.
I know some of the other brands in the category, and the fact that you guys found that avenue to focus on is so interesting because I know of our place, and it's like everyone I know who owns that famous Instagram, famous pan or whatever, it's like none of them own anything else from the brand. All of them just bought it because they saw it on Instagram, and they're all my age or younger. And so it's like finding that you guys found that gap in the market. I don't know, like you think of it all as being like, oh, you use the same pans your whole life. But now that I think about it, it's like you don't. I still have a pan from my dad's original apartment, which I should probably get rid of now that we've had this conversation. I'm like, it's probably killing me. But like, I feel like every time I buy something like that next step up. It's a little bit nicer, looks a little bit nicer, costs a little bit more. So finding out that structure and sort of leaning into it is just a really interesting way to go about it.
Definitely. And I think, one of the approaches that we formulated, which I don't think was necessarily defined at the beginning, was a lot of our competitors naturally started selling with single cookware pieces. They definitely had sets as well. And I think one of the opportunities we saw in speaking with consumers and having that time to do the research was taking a sets first approach. So when we launched Caraway, we actually only had the cookware set in 5 or 6 colors. And it put a big emphasis on these kind of a higher price point, but also as a brand, we're saying to the customer, we actually spent the time curating the exact set that you need and nothing more versus coming to the site and not knowing if you should buy 1 pan or 2 or the set. And so that was a bit of a pivot in the R&D stage around the merchandising that we wanted to launch with.
And I'm curious because you did mention you guys were, in your words, the last to fundraise as well. And it sounds like fundraising was pretty tough, but how did you guys end up getting to the yes? How did you guys figure out how to get investors to get on board with this?
My first raise took about 10 months total from start to close. I probably was doing anywhere from 5 to 8 investor meetings every single day for almost that full 10-month period. We ended up having over 100 investors in our first round. So a lot of discussions, many more no's than yeses. But at the time, it was challenging because all these other brands had been invested in. I was a single founder. I had no hires. I had a deck with no product designed. I pulled an image off of Google into the deck around like what it could roughly feel like and look like. And I think where I had really leaned into the pitch was just having come from the kitchen category and really understanding the dynamics of margins and financial discipline and, understanding of an omni-channel strategy. And, at the end of the day, there's an infinite amount of capital out there, and we just had to keep grinding until we got all the yeses. But it didn't all come at once. We didn't get some big VC check and, call it a day. I think what was really helpful in the process was meeting a lot of folks, building our network, and every month I get a few yeses. And by the time we got to the end of the process, we put that capital to work that came in earlier from the earlier checks into the product development, the branding, and a lot of those early conversations led to some of the later checks that we got into the round.
And you're not sold in any retailers, right?
We are today. And so actually being omni-channel was really built into the strategy from the start. And so we were talking with Target, who we're in today, Bed Bath & Beyond, a lot of the major retailers before we even launched the brand.
Oh, wow. So there was never the, I guess, idea or want to just strictly stay like online e-commerce.
No, and speaking towards like watching others launch in the market, I think we saw a lot of competitors wanting to just focus on D2C. And we saw an opportunity where if we could be first to retail, build a moat, that's a differentiation versus competition. And having the experience in the category, I'm sure you guys have lived through this as well, when you're buying a new home, registering for your wedding, maybe a change in lifestyle to look to be more healthy or non-toxic in what you use. You traditionally are going to these major retailers because you're buying a big assortment of products at once. And so for us, it was important to leverage retailers to reach new customers in those life moments. Whereas our site would be kind of our, storefront and how we're acquiring customers on Meta and look to get that distribution as early as we could.
So bold of you to assume Dom and I are married and or homeowners. But that does make a lot of sense because I was looking at the website before we hopped on, and the registry piece of it definitely stood out to me because you're right. I mean, a lot of those smaller brands, even if they were to offer something like that, it's like, what would be the point? Because if you're building a registry, you go and you're like, okay, I can get one thing from this place, which sounds very complicated, the whole grand scheme of things.
More from this conversation right after a quick break.
Caraway has expanded a lot in the 5-year history that you guys have been around into everything in the kitchen, but lots of different categories. And I'm curious, of course, all of the expansions are in the same category, but adding new SKUs, adding new products, of course, can both be a good thing or they can be not adopted as much. Like, how did you guys decide when was the right time to expand?
Yeah, so today we're in a number of categories: bakeware, food storage, knives and utensils, gadgets. And part of what we're building today and why the brand's named Caraway Home is we do have aspirations to really tackle the full home and kitchen. And, I think one of the concerns from investors early on was like, all right, someone buys a cookware set, then what? They don't come back, they buy it once, maybe they need a new set in 5 years, but what are you doing in between to keep them engaged? And as mentioned, one of my learnings from the prior business that I worked at was color drives repeat, and customers really want to have a cohesive kitchen. And as we look at the world of the kitchen, there's a lot of independently beautiful products that exist. Your KitchenAid stand mixer, your Wolf stovetop, your Breville coffee maker. And what ends up happening is you have this kitchen of items that don't really make sense together once you combine their aesthetics. And, we feel like as a brand, it's really important to expand categories from a business perspective for retention, but also, if our goal is to eliminate toxic materials from the market, we want to make sure customers have that opportunity to buy into a non-toxic kitchen at home. And so as we've expanded, there's been product categories where ceramic has been the right material choice to help solve toxins. Whereas we have some other ones that are tackling some new issues like microplastics, getting in your food, more eco-friendly measures as well. And so as we start building and growing even more, product development's a huge piece of our DNA. And I think speaking towards earlier investor pitches, that was always part of the pitch was we're going to build this full big kitchen and some products will be successful, some might not, but it really diversifies the portfolio for the brand. And, if someone doesn't want cookware, we've got something else for them. If they're waiting for the next cookware purchase they need to make in many years, we have other stuff for them to buy from us.
And knowing that you guys did launch at a time where there were a lot of other companies in the category, and especially right before COVID, when we were then all at home looking at Instagram and just doom scrolling on our phones, I know you guys have used influencer marketing as a big piece of how you've gotten the word out. And I definitely am curious if you want to talk about what that process was like and how that has been effective in selling something in such a crowded market.
Yeah, our influencer program is a huge piece of our business. And actually, it really started very early on. I think in our launch week, we had 100 or 200 ambassadors that we partnered with post about the brand. And we really got to see the power of working with incredible creators who love the product, they love the brand, and really represent the values. And since that point, we internally now have an ambassador program with around 3,000 or 4,000 influencers that we work with across a variety of industries, interior design, a lot of parents, lifestyle, etc. I think where we see the power of influencers is reach, but also third-party validation on the products. It's very different when Caraway is saying, our products are the best to use and they're super non-stick. And we've been fortunate to have great partnerships with incredible influencers over the years that love the products. And I think what's been really exciting as the brand has expanded is now that we have all these product categories, the influencers that were best performing for cookware don't necessarily mean they're the best performing for other categories. So with that, we've been able to expand the type of influencers that we work with, type of content that we're creating, and it's been an amazing growth mechanism for the business.
Oh, that's so funny. I was actually going to ask that in terms of which influencers sell which product better. Like, who buys the bakeware products and from who?
Yeah. I mean, we have big communities around different product lines and different kind of cohorts across each. And then, we have certain influencers that perform great across the full kitchen. And so it's really a test and learn approach. And we're also looking at site data in terms of where people are coming from, what's the best product to pair them with, et cetera.
And before we sort of dive into building the actual company and some of that side of the business, I definitely wanted to ask you, what got you involved in the kitchenware space to begin with? Were you always interested in cooking or always kind of paying attention to product? How did you get excited about this space even before you started the company?
Yeah, by sheer chance at my prior company, I was kind of thrown into the kitchen brand. I think at the time they had a beauty brand. And when I joined the company, I thought I was going to jump onto that and was excited to kind of explore that area, but was put into the kitchen. And I think the one thing I really fell in love with was just the really lack of design approach in the space. I'm someone who likes to curate everything that I buy, whether it's the clothing that I wear or the pieces in my home. And, I think the one thing that the kitchen category has been missing is design and colors that I think represent your personality and your design interests. And, I think fell in love with the category. And I think the other piece too is, as a consumer, most brands out there just spoke towards bringing professional tools into the home. And I'm someone that I enjoy cooking, but I'm not going to spend 5 hours on a weekend cooking something crazy. And the cleanup to me is really important. I want it to be really easy. And I think just the opportunity and synchronization of design with non-toxic, with ease of use are three principles I really love. And the kitchen happens to be one that kind of lacked that. And so ended up here, but, love the space. And it's such a great category. I think the other piece I'll add is I love product development. It's my background. You see it come through in the brand with the breadth of what we're launching. And I think the great thing about just the home in general is there's effectively an infinite amount of products that you can launch. And you can't say that about every category. And to me, that's just really exciting, is really the breadth of what you can build within the category.
And what has it been like for you personally being a founder? Because I know you've held higher up management positions at the businesses you've worked at in the past, but being a founder is obviously a very different animal than that. And what has it been like for you, especially I know you mentioned being a solo founder. What has it been like building the business for you personally, getting it off the ground?
Yeah, it's a tough job. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, but it's really fun to build something from scratch, seeing customers love the products you create, building an incredible team and seeing them grow. I think a single founder in many ways is both more challenging, but also easier. I think just surrounding yourself with great people is tremendously important. And it's been a great experience so far. Obviously, have had a couple near-death experiences, but I think what we're building is really important and impactful. And I think finding a mission that you're really passionate about makes all the tough days worth it.
We got to go back to that. A couple near-death experiences. You've only told us about one. What are the others?
Oh, man. Well, probably the biggest one that comes to mind is, so we launched on November 5th, 2019. And I think on November 1st, we had, I think like 30 to 50 cookware sets coming from our factory that were shipped through like FedEx to our office that we were going to give to press. And the FedEx guy shows up. He brings all these huge boxes into the office. We start hearing like clanging and all this like metal hitting. And once he was done delivering, we opened up all the boxes, which was for our press launch. And the packaging that we created, the structural integrity collapsed on the inside. And so every box was just a wreck. All the pans were hitting against each other. The paint was chipped. The handles were ruined. And our first order, which was probably 5,000 units or so, was on the container from Asia. We had product that we couldn't ship to press. We had product coming on the water that we probably couldn't ship to consumers because it would come destroyed. And then on top of that, on November 3rd, which was 2 days after that, we have this lid holder that comes in our set to hang your lids on a wall. We had these really beautiful stainless steel hooks to be able to place them on your cabinet door. And we had those hooks hanging with a lid holder in our office for, I think, a month. And on November 3rd, it came collapsing down in our office. And so we effectively had defective hooks in our box plus packaging. We had to get creative. We, I think, wrapped the good units from the press samples in like brown boxes and shipped them to all the big editors. And I think we were getting messages back from like Vogue and such being like, oh, we think we got your returned product, not the actual product. And then we had to go to the warehouse once the products arrived. We had to repack 5,000 sets. We had to source new hooks to put in the boxes. And fortunately, I think shipped out our first units to consumers by November 29th, but was high pressure. And the team did a great job kind of finding a solution. And yeah, had we not gotten through that, I don't know if we'd be around.
That's crazy that it's just showed up and like everything fell apart. Like, I know it sounds like you were able to quickly get the first batch of orders out, but how did you guys like adjust from there and sort of like make those changes? Like, was it easy to kind of fix those packaging things or not as much?
It wasn't easy to fix the ones that were shipped. I think to start as the leader and founder, I had to maintain just like, oh, it's fine, we'll get it fixed attitude. Meanwhile, I was, burning inside. And
right.
Yeah, we redesigned the packaging. We ordered pieces here in the US and had to go repack them. We sourced hooks really quickly. So we rolled those changes into future batches, and it wasn't very, very expensive. And we didn't have a lot of capital at the time to rework the boxes. But yeah, we were able to get it done, and probably a good learning to make sure that you drop test your boxes before you ship them. And, it's better to make sure the product's great and not rush it, and I think we made that mistake.
And perhaps before we wrap, I did want to go back and ask a little bit about you and building out the team. I guess the first question was really, who was your first hire?
Yeah, so first hire, funny enough, brought on a friend from Mohawk Group, which was the company that I worked at before, to lead operations and customer service, which is not my area of expertise. And when we launched the business, we had 4 hires, including myself. So it was a kind of an individual to lead ops and customer service, an individual to lead brand and creative, and then an individual to lead growth. And 2 of those 3 are still here today, leading both brand and ops at the company.
Is like a scientist something you would hire for in terms of like research for non-toxic stuff, or is that still just a standard research and development thing?
Yeah, so we don't have any scientists or material experts internally, but we do partner externally with experts, with manufacturers on a lot of these areas.
What's in store in the future? Like, where is Caraway headed in the next few years? Where are your aspirations? I know you talk about getting into the whole home at some point, but What's in the more immediate term? What are the next few years like?
There's so much still to do in the kitchen. We have a lot of product launches coming up, a lot of new distribution channels that we're opening up, and focus on improving the customer experience. I think we've seen great growth over the years. We know what works. And as a business, we're looking to add, but also really hone in on what we do well and make sure we're continuing to do it well.
Well, perfect. Well, that puts us right about at time. So thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
And that was our conversation with Jordan. Dom, what did you think? What was the lie?
The lie was that he started out as an aspiring cook. He's actually just a regular guy. He's just a normal at-home cook.
He's just one of us.
He's one of us.
I love that. It's fun to talk to a company like this. As he talked about, they came out at a time where there was like a ton of other companies being launched in the exact same category, and they're all being launched kind of the exact same way. And it's interesting to hear about how that impacted how they did make decisions and sort of how they went from that starting point,
I know. I always love seeing who survived the D2C boom, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think we spoke about this in terms of which companies actually survived that time and why they're still here today. This just makes sense. Like, yes, non-toxic cookware. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I felt that people always talk about being first. And I know, like, if you look at like the AI market right now, like clearly so much of all of the fanfare and the excitement and the craziness is because people are trying to get to that first spot or like get that highest market share first and try to grab hold of it. Like there's such a battle to the top. So it was really interesting to hear him talk about how they were kind of last and how being last actually worked for them because they could kind of see the little changes they wanted to make before they launched her. And he mentioned like the little changes he wanted to make in like his pitch to investors, which is something we don't talk about often. I know it reminds me of that Adam Grant book, Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World, because one of the big things they talked about in that book is that the people who are first are often not who wins, especially on the business side. And they're often not who is the company that lasts at the end of the day. And I mean, we can think about that a lot of like the websites we use now and how like we don't barely use anything from like the .com boom. The first wave of those websites, most of them didn't survive. And so him talking about the benefit of going last just like made me think about that because it isn't always about going first.
No, yeah, it's preparation meets opportunity, right? We always hear about founders wanting to build really, really fast, but I kind of like hearing a founder that took more of their time, studied what they were doing and tried to make it right because there was no need to be first, right? Like they did it on the timeline that worked for them. And in the end, yeah, they might have been last, but I don't know, they were right on time for what they needed to be at.
And it's funny to think about too, because we just said all of that about not being first, but then they were the first to retail, which definitely helped them. But I think that all ties into it. Like, I think if they had gone first on D2C, they probably wouldn't have thought of moving into retail as fast, which ended up being really helpful for them to have done that earlier.
Yeah, because he said it in the beginning, right, that it was always his plan to kind of move into brick and mortar stores.
Yeah, especially because he's right. Every time I order a pan online, I feel crazy. Like, I want to go and look at it and touch it and then not buy it and then buy it online.
Am I crazy or... Maybe this was like a few years ago when I was at Insider covering retail. I feel like there was a moment, and maybe this wasn't everywhere, but at least maybe in fashion and beauty, there was a time when everyone was like, e-commerce is going to be it, and there's not going to be brick and mortar is just going to die. Am I crazy or that was like a thing?
No, that was definitely a thing. And it's like the Amazonification of everything, how like everyone just assumes you want to buy everything online. And it's just like, I actually prefer to buy as little online as I can. And I mean, I definitely do buy stuff online. Like, do I need to go and pick up my dog's food from the auto ship once a month in person? Like, no, I can order that online. She gets the same thing every month. But it's like buying stuff for myself, like clothes and all that stuff. Like, I really just do like buying it better in person. But I also like the convenience where it's like, if I buy from a shoe company, I know the shoe fits and I know my size, then you can buy it online from there. So I feel like their model of like doing D2C but getting into retail really early, that makes a lot of sense. Because if like I owned one of their pans that I'd gone and bought at Bed Bath & Beyond, rest in peace, I love that store, I could just buy another one online.
Yeah.
And that's a great system.
No, I know I'm getting older because when I was looking at their pots and pans, I was like, that is a nice pot. I was like fantasizing in my head. I was like, the things I would do with that pot in my kitchen. I was like, bakeware too? Oh my gosh, Top Chef. I would be doing that.
No, I feel you because I was doing it in like even more of like a lamer way because I was like, those storage containers, my leftovers would slay in those. Like, I was like, I need that.
Yeah, I was like, storage containers, I know exactly what I'm doing with this.
Exactly. I did also think it was super interesting, his story, though, about their first shipment. I feel like a lot more founders have stories like that than we get to hear about how it's like they just didn't realize the packaging they had picked just wasn't going to work.
I know.
So it's like the products came and like they're all destroyed. Like, I feel like based on how many things I've gotten in the mail from like very established retailers that were destroyed, I have a feeling a lot more companies have those like early war stories than we often get to hear.
I know. I love hearing about the early logistics of it all and figuring out what ships and what doesn't ship.
Yeah, because I mean, it's hard to believe that people would just get that stuff right the first time. I always think it's interesting to look at like how stuff is packaged, like how some stuff can just come in the box it's in and other stuff has to be in like boxception with 10 pounds of like packing material. Like, I bet a lot more brands have to deal with figuring out these logistics than I think we hear of.
Yeah, I know. I would actually read a book about that, of just packaging mishaps and everything that a brand has learned from it. Because, yeah, it must be harder than we think, especially shipping a bunch of pots. Well, obviously, it is harder than we think.
Yeah. No, I'll never forget, I once got a cast iron from Amazon and it got the email that it had been dropped off and I went down to get it. And both the handle and the little other handle on the side, so like both handles essentially were sticking out of the box. And I was like, oh my, like this thing went for a journey. Like half the pan was like out of the box because it was cast iron. Like it was fine because those things are like indestructible. But I was just like, oh, this wasn't done right.
Wait, that's kind of funny. Well, did you check all of your pots and pans after talking to him? Are they poisonous?
I just wallowed about it and know that they definitely are. I mean, I literally have a pan from my dad's. It's either from my mom or my dad's like first apartment. So it's, no offense to my parents, but it's old. It's real old.
I asked my parents too, and they were like, all of our pots are fine except that one we cook eggs in. And I'm like, well, except that one we cook what? Eggs.
Maybe it's time. This was a good reminder, though, that I probably should replace my kitchen stuff.
Yeah, it's time. It's time. And also to pay attention to where you get kitchen stuff from. Because, of course, big pan industry would be poisoning us in America.
As Big Pan would.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.